What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the changes to Death's Due. And if you're not familiar with what just went down, Blizzard just incredibly nerfed the heck out of Death's Due and makes it so that it no longer passively will debuff an enemy and buff yourself. And what I mean by that is, in the old state, when I cast Death's Due, my target, or anything in Death's Due here, would slowly stack all the way up to 15 stacks of damage reduction against me. As you can see, nothing happened. Literally nothing happened there. Instead, now what you have to do is you have to cast your Death's Due and then use your Heart Strike to get the stacks on. You can see here it is. And it's got a 12-second now instead of a 15-second counter. And the most you can get is all 6 of your Rune Spenders, so 6 Heart Strikes. And then you got to cast it again, and that'll bring you up to a total of 8 stacks, and that's where you cap out. So now, instead of it being a 15% damage reduction and a 15% strength enhancement to yourself, you're forced with, this 8% either way, which is, an okay change, but unless you live in a perfect world, it's going to be tough to get those initial 6 stacks on. And then from there, you need to wait for the cooldown. We got our cooldown. We can go ahead and start stacking it again. And now we're done stacking. And as you can see, I need to keep hitting with Heart Strike so that by the time my next Death's Due comes off cooldown, I can keep this up. So there is a way to have 100% uptime when you're fighting a boss, but you really need to prioritize your Heart Strikes. That means that you're going to be leveraging Death Strike, obviously, as your main rune spender. There's just going to be a little less room for your Marrow Rend in your rotation. So that's something that you should really be cognizant of. Now, the other thing that this skill does is it allows enemies to be hit by Heart Strike that were not able to be hit before. So if you're spec'd into Heartbreaker, your Heart Strike generates 2 additional runic power per target hit. So if you stand in Death's Due, you're able to hit multiple targets as long as you're close. So I'm targeting this one. You'll see that this target dummy is getting the debuff as well. It's this blue debuff right here. But again, you're going to cap at 6 if all you do is Heart Strike. And then it's up to you to get it right back up. And there you go. So you're getting the 2 extra runic power for Heart Strike, but it is not stacking when you hit it with the extra target when you're standing in Death's Due. So that's something to call out as well. But this is a big time nerf for Blood DKs. Really, they were the talk of the town as far as tanks were concerned. This was a very, very strong Covenant ability for Blood DK. And now what this does is it kind of opens the door for the other Covenants a little bit. It just kind of depends on how you look at it. Now, I say this, and when you compare it across the board, you still have to consider the fact that the Necrolords doesn't give you much overall, other than the utility that you get maybe in dungeons or in trash mobs with the arm pulling the casters into you. It acts as another death grip, a free death grip once every second or so for anything that's further than 18 yards. We pivot over to the Kyrian. Shackle the Unworthy is going to give you a 5% baseline mitigation as long as Shackle the Unworthy is up, and you have the ability to reduce the cooldown on Shackle the Unworthy as you use your rune spenders. So that one gives you a little bit more freedom because you can cast Marrow Rend, and you can cast your Heart Strike ability, and you can go ahead and still work on reducing that cooldown. But that's a flat out 5% damage mitigation versus this, which could be not only a debuff but also a buff as far as buffing your strength by 8% as well. So you'll see I got my buff going here. I got 8 Death's Due on me, even though it fell off of the enemy. They've got 8 now. So I'm back up to 8 on myself, so strength is increased by 8. So you're just going to have to start weighing different things. Now, what Kyrian, for example, brings you that you don't get with this is you get an outright strength buff, which is going to help you in really all facets of the game. with Night Fae, but you do not get your Summon Steward, which is ultimately going to allow you to, cleanse, poisons, bleeds. I mean, you name it off of yourself. That's not something that you can do in if you go Night Fae. So that's a great example of just something that you're picking different utility over maybe flat outright strength in that scenario. The other thing now that this nerf to Death Stew has done is it may make you consider Venthyr. If you're someone who plays and you have a tough time getting your runic power going. Granted, I think the Venthyr ability still needs quite a bit of buffing to get it to the point where it's viable outside of dungeons, especially when you're only hitting one target. But overall, you get a flat out 10% damage mitigation to single target in the form of dodge. So not flat out mitigation, but you get dodge. So these are all things worth considering now. So this nerf to Death Stew is pretty substantial. It sounds great in theory to have an 8% flat outright mitigation. You mix that with your overall strength, and this increases your parry chance, of course, so that your parry chance will go up as you have more strength as a DK, but that doesn't give you the flat out 10% dodge that you would get from going Venthyr. That does not give you the ability, as I mentioned, to cleanse poisons, diseases, you name it, as a Kyrian. All Death Stew does is it's a flat out mitigation. Now, the neat thing about this one, if you were to compare it side by side with the Kyrian effect, is that as I'm stacking this on a single target, I know that as long as I'm standing in my Death Stew, I'm going to hit multiple targets, up to 2 other targets at a time. And the problem is positioning, so they all have to be a little bit closer. I'm probably not going to be able to get it here. Just going to be out of range, it looks like. Oh, there we go. 4, 4, 2. So I was able to hit all 3 at once here. Let me see if I can do it again. Just to kind of showcase it. And this is where, here we go, there's just a spot. This is where you can actually start to see the value of Death Stew still coming out as the strongest because of all the boss fights that are, ad facing, where you're facing off against many ads. They join the battle. You got to pick them up. It's great to mitigate. Right now, if these were actively hitting me, I'd be mitigating 24% mitigation across the board. Between all 3 of this. So 24% of the damage incoming that I would normally have would be mitigated right here. 8 times 3 is 24. So that's where I'm getting that from. So that's the nice part, is that the multi-target, the way that this scales with multi-target is much better than right now Kyrian, which currently only lets you mitigate it based on where Shackle and where the uptime is on. So that's a single target mitigation or dodge. So just keep that in mind. Same thing with the Venthyr. That is also going to be 10% dodge. So that's where these start to kind of scale together a little bit better in AoE situations. Is Venthyr is going to give you that flat out runic power increase, up to 15 runic power every second. So you're just getting massive amounts of runic power when you're tanking trash. You're also going to get 10% dodge, and that's going to be across the board. So you have a 30% chance if you're facing off against 3 mobs to dodge at any given time any one of those 3 attacks. So if we go through and we look at Necrolords, as of right now, Necrolords, despite the fact that it looks to be very thematic, in terms of, hey, I'd like to park my DK and be a Necrolord because I'm kind of an undead thing. The thematic cohesion with Necrolords is about as far as it goes right now, because you're not getting much in the form of utility or mitigation in its current form. So that extra arm, while it's very nice in dungeons to have things just kind of be pulled into you once every second that it's active, all that's really doing is interrupting spellcasters. You already have a couple of things in your toolkit here. You have Death Grip and you have your Gorefiend's Grasp. So those are going to be your 2 main things that if you don't go Necrolords, you're not going to be missing out on too much in terms of the utility that Necrolords brings. So hopefully this was helpful, and it gave you a bit of a walkthrough in terms of the main changes to Death Stew. I still think that this is very likely the best Covenant for Death Knight, but you know, it's a lot closer now than it was before. You know, Blizzard is they made a meaningful change. I did not think that we were going to see this get nerfed down to 8. I figured it'd settle in right around 10, and I also was not expecting for it to be tied to your rotation, to be tied to Heart Strike specifically. I thought it would still remain a passive thing. So they have given you some very meaningful choice. You're going to have to make sure that you've got your Marrow Rend up. You're going to likely have to make sure that you're coupling that with Dancing Rune Weapon anytime you're using Death's Due, so that you only really have to cast it the one time. So I'll show you exactly what I mean here. It helps you get your Bone Shield up a lot faster. So let's wait for this to fall off. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hit my Dancing Rune Weapon. Bone Shield's up. There we go, I got my max stacks. Death's Due is down. And now I start using my spenders. So I already used 4 runes to get max stacks. You're probably not going to be doing that. You're probably just going to use 1, and you'll be able to get an extra cast out. So I got up to 5 stacks there. So it's still very realistic to get up to 6 stacks during the initial Death's Due, as long as you're coupling it with Dancing Rune Weapon. Now you're not always going to have Dancing Rune Weapon up. So this is where I mean this gets tricky. So as I watch, I've got 2 seconds left on my Bone Shield. I had to go ahead and refresh, and that took a stack where you know, if this was getting low, that took my rotation, it took my runes, and it allocated it elsewhere. So there's a chance that you're not always going to have just about everything you're tanking up to 8 stacks. Now, if this is a boss, of course, you should still have 100% uptime, where it's flat out 8% mitigation, and you've got your flat out 8% strength buff, and you're just off to the races. You're only really refreshing your Marrow Rend as needed. But if you're getting hit and your stacks are getting low, you're going to start to see that you're going to have to make some meaningful gameplay choices between, am I buffing myself, or am I making sure that I've got Marrow Rend and I've got my Bone Shield up for the extra haste buff. So all that stuff is stuff to keep in mind, and it's certainly a big change overall, and not something that I expected this late in the beta at this point in time. So anyway, hopefully this helped you understand the changes, how it was before versus how it is now, why people are actually talking about this, and you know, maybe this influences what you were planning on doing from a class perspective. Let me know in the comments below.